We have read about slavery in books and heard stories about it, but have we ever seen how cruel the life of a slave can be? Today, I will tell you the story of such a slave, who went abroad in search of work to improve his life, but was sold into slavery due to a conspiracy. In the vast desert, day after day he worked tirelessly, where there was no adequate food or water, enduring unbearable hardships to the point where he even forgot his own name. Will he ever be free from such a captive life? Let's hear the story of The Goat Life, one of the best movies of this year, based on a true story that happened in the life of an Indian youth, which took almost 16 years to make. So let's start the story. Najib Mohammed, who was landing at the Saudi Arabian airport for the first time, was standing fearfully at the passport checking area. This was the first time he had left his family and come so far to a different country, far from his homeland. The checking officer asked him something in Arabic, but Najib couldn't understand the language. Then his friend Hakim, who was also in the line, came forward. Neither Najib nor Hakim knew any language other than Malayalam. Somehow, Hakim managed to get approval for both of their passports by repeatedly saying, "Help, sir! Help, sir!" and they got through the checking process. Najib and Hakim had both come to this foreign land in search of better income, but here they were, wandering around the airport like blind men. The person who was supposed to pick them up had not yet arrived. They found a fellow countryman and asked for his help. The man helped them call the phone number of the person through whom they had come here, but although the phone rang, no one answered. The man then informed them that their sponsor might be stuck in traffic, and they should wait because their sponsor would surely come to pick them up. The two of them continued to wait inside the airport. Everyone else who had arrived on the same flight boarded air-conditioned buses and left with their sponsors, leaving only Najib and Hakim behind. At one point, they began to think that no one would come to pick them up. Just then, a sheikh approached them and asked them many questions in Arabic, but they couldn't understand a word, so the man left, annoyed. After a while, the sheikh returned, checked their passports, and told them to get into his pickup truck. Although Najib and Hakim didn't understand anything, they were a bit surprised. Everyone else had left the airport in expensive cars, yet this old broken car had been allotted for them. However, they said nothing, thinking that this sponsor would take them to their correct destination. Najib wanted to ask the man for some water, but he was not given any. They were told to sit in the back of the pickup truck, and both of them got in blindly. Then their journey began toward an unknown destination. They had no idea what cruel life awaited them. Hakim had fallen asleep on the way. Feeling cold in the chilly desert wind, Najib wrapped a thin blanket around Hakim and covered his own ears with a towel. After traveling for a long time, they still couldn't figure out where they were being taken. The car eventually stopped at a farm, and the jolt woke Hakim from his sleep. Their sponsor got out and told Hakim to get down from the car. Najib also tried to get down, but the sponsor stopped him and only allowed Hakim to disembark. Both of them were quite shocked. Najib repeatedly requested the sponsor to allow him to make a phone call, but he was not permitted to do so. Meanwhile, a man came out from inside the farm and tried to take Hakim inside. In a panic, Najib told Hakim, "Brother," in any language, whether it's English, Tamil, try to explain to them that we should stay together. Hakim tried to communicate in broken Tamil and English, but the Arab sheikh didn't pay any attention. The farmhand took Hakim inside and locked the door, while another man whipped Najib and forced him back into the car. The car started moving again. Najib couldn't tell how long they traveled before he was finally dropped off at another farm. As soon as he got down, the dry, sandy wind sent a chill through Najib's body. Once again, Najib requested the sponsor to allow him to make a phone call, but the sponsor handed him over to the farmhand and quickly left. Najib felt completely lost. What was he supposed to do now? Where would he go in this vast desert? Who would help him? Suddenly, Najib spotted an Indian man who spoke Hindi, but they couldn't understand each other's language since Najib only knew Tamil. Still, Najib gestured to the man, indicating that he wanted water, and the man pointed to a nearby water tank. Najib opened the tap and drank his fill, then sat down, leaning against the tank. He had just closed his eyes when a camel approached his face, startling him awake. Najib had never seen a camel before, and the strange-looking creature frightened him. Najib asked the Hindi-speaking man where he could sleep. The man mumbled something in a thick accent that Najib couldn't understand. Using his own wits, Najib found his way into the sponsor's tent and lay down comfortably to sleep. After a long, exhausting day, as Najib finally got a chance to relax, memories of his village flooded his mind. In his village, Najib used to dive into the water to extract sand from the riverbed. On one such day, while he was collecting sand, a friend offered him a foreign cigarette, saying it was brought by his brother-in-law. His friend also mentioned that his brother-in-law had brought 2 visas with him. Najib's friend advised him to go abroad. Najib replied that he didn't have enough money to go, but his friend suggested that it would only cost around 30,000 rupees. Najib could easily manage this amount by mortgaging his house. Once abroad, Najib could repay the loan in just a few months of work. The friend's advice made sense to Najib, so he somehow managed the money and went with his friend to meet the brother-in-law, handing him the cash. When Najib returned home, he found his mother and wife busily preparing pickles and sweets to mark his departure abroad. Najib shared his excitement about going abroad with his wife and mother, discussing their future plans together. Now, lying in the vast desert thousands of kilometers away, Najib felt a sense of comfort thinking about those beautiful memories. Suddenly, he was jolted awake by a kick from the sponsor, who, without any reason, started beating and cursing him, forcing Najib out of the tent. Even though Najib couldn't understand the language, he realized from the man's behavior that the sponsor saw him as a servant, and it was likely unacceptable for a servant to sleep next to his master, which is why he was being thrown out like this. Najib curled up and spent the night sleeping in an abandoned car. The next morning, when Najib woke up, he saw the same Hindi-speaking man milking a sheep. When Najib approached him, the man handed him a jug of milk, instructing him to give it to the sponsor inside. But since Najib couldn't understand, he started drinking the milk himself. The man immediately stopped him and explained again, asking him to take the milk inside to the sponsor. Najib went into the tent and handed the milk to the sponsor, who drank it quickly. Najib then pleaded with the sponsor, saying he didn't want to stay there and wanted to return home. He even grabbed the sponsor's feet, crying and begging him to arrange for his return, but the sponsor showed no mercy and pushed him out of the tent. A little later, Najib saw the same sponsor who had left him there the previous night approaching. Desperate, Najib ran to him, begging him to send him back, explaining that he had been sent there to work for a company, not to live in the middle of the desert. He told the sponsor that he had sold his house to come here, and without work, his family would be left destitute. To prove his story, Najib took out his notebook, showing the financial records and the sponsor's phone number. The sponsor, however, tore up the notebook, and at that moment, Najib's fate seemed to come to a halt. He broke down in tears, but who was there to listen to his cries? After a while, the 2 sponsors started making bread and called Najib over. At first, Najib was angry and refused to respond, sitting outside instead. When the main sponsor offered him some bread, signaling for him to eat, Najib, unable to stay angry due to his intense hunger, approached and began eating ravenously. His hunger made him choke several times, and his eyes filled with tears of regret. After finishing his meal, Najib went to the Hindi-speaking man and asked how far the main road was from there. The man gestured, indicating that the main road was very far away and that it was impossible for Najib to reach it. Hearing this, Najib became completely disheartened, and another sorrowful day passed in the heart of the desert. That night, Najib tried to piece together the torn fragments of his notebook. But with his luck in shambles, how could he ever mend the torn pages? Once again, he found himself thinking about the beautiful moments spent with his wife, deciding on their unborn child's name, planning its future, and remembering his wife's tearful eyes as she saw him off at the station. Thinking of all this, he passed the night. The next morning, while Najib was using the bathroom, the sponsor kicked him and took away his water jug. Seeing Najib's surprise, the Hindi-speaking man gestured to him, explaining that wasting water here was a crime and that he should clean himself with sand instead. Najib, bewildered, thought to himself, What a strange land have I come to? A little later, a waterman came to load the water tank. Najib approached him, pleading to be taken away from there. Just then, the main sponsor noticed him and asked what he was talking about with the waterman. Najib shook his head, indicating that he said nothing. But the sponsor knew exactly what Najib was trying to do and started beating him with his whip. At one point, Najib grabbed the whip and screamed that he didn't want to stay there. Angered by Najib's defiance, the sponsor returned to his tent and came back with a gun. When Najib tried to grab the gun's barrel, the sponsor got even angrier, first kicking Najib and then hitting him on the forehead with the gun. Najib fell to the ground, his limbs limp, unable to get up. The waterman, too, looked on helplessly at Najib's condition, and in his distraction, he didn't notice that the water tank had overflowed and was spilling all over the ground. As Najib watched the stream of water trickling away, memories of the beautiful and romantic moments he had shared with his flooding back. Despite the struggles they faced, there was no shortage of happiness in their household. Though they did not have an abundance of money, they never lacked water, and most importantly, there was no shortage of his wife's love. He didn't know if he would ever see his wife's beautiful face again. Najib called out his wife's name and cried like a madman, realizing that there was no other way to release his pain but to let it out. In the morning, Najib was awakened by the voice of the younger couple, who pointed to the milking jar, instructing him to milk the sheep. However, Najib had never done this before, and as a result, he was kicked by a sheep. The younger couple then showed him how to do it properly. Najib asked where the Hindi man was, as it was his job. The younger kafil harshly replied that the man had died, so all his tasks now fell to Najib. After giving further instructions on how to milk the sheep, the younger kafil left, and after several attempts, Najib finally succeeded in milking the sheep. Later, Najib took the flock of sheep to graze. When two sheep began to fight, Najib tried to intervene, but another sheep attacked him from behind, knocking him down. As he tried to sit up, the sheep charged at him again, causing Najib to lose consciousness. The kafil, watching from a distance, fired a shot in the air, scaring the sheep away. Then he poured water on Najib's face to bring him around. When Najib asked for water, he was given just a sip. Struggling to stand, Najib pleaded with the kafil to take him to the hospital as he was badly injured. But the kafil ignored him and instead handed him a stick, ordering him to look after the sheep before walking away. Days, or perhaps years, passed in this manner, with Najib losing track of time. He had no idea how long he had been there. One day, two men arrived in a vehicle to collect sheep wool. When Najib saw his reflection in the car's mirror, he was shocked. His beard and mustache made him look terrifying, and he could barely recognize himself. Just then, the elder kafil appeared behind him and smashed the mirror with a stone, mocking him, saying, "Who do you think you are, some sort of hero?" Najib then tried to trim his beard with a broken shard of glass, but it wasn't sharp enough. He began to cry in despair, muttering to himself, "I can't take this anymore, God. Please grant me either freedom or death." As Najib looked up at the sky to remember God, he noticed some vultures circling above. He hurried to a nearby crevice in the rock and saw a dead body below, being eaten by the vultures. Najib realized it was the body of the Hindi man. As he stared in shock at the corpse, the vultures turned and attacked him. After a brief struggle, Najib was forced to flee. Upon returning to the camp, he took out the jar of pickles his mother had given him and inhaled its aroma deeply. He then ate a piece, steeling his resolve and deciding that he had to escape somehow. Otherwise, he feared he would end up like the Hindi man, dead and picked apart by vultures. The next day, while grazing the sheep, Najib ran in a random direction, not looking back. However, he didn't realize that the kafil was following him from a distance. When the kafil saw Najib trying to escape, he fired a shot near his feet, causing Najib to fall in fear. The kafil then approached and began beating Najib's legs with the butt of his rifle, making sure he would never attempt to escape again. Afterwards, the kafil dragged him back to the camp and tied him up. Despite Najib's best efforts, he was unable to free himself until he managed to untie the rope with his teeth. However, due to the severe pain in his legs, he could barely stand, so he limped forward, desperately seeking water. Finally, he quenched his thirst by sipping from the same water trough as the sheep. Days passed, and Najib resumed taking the sheep to graze. Suddenly, the sky darkened with thick black clouds, and soon hail began to fall. Najib quickly led the flock to shelter in a cave. After a long time, he heard a faint noise in the distance and, following the sound, discovered a tunnel inside the mountain. Najib ventured into the tunnel and eventually emerged on the other side, where by chance he encountered his friend Hakim. After so long, the two embraced and cried together upon seeing each other again. Hakim urged, "Come on, brother, let's escape." But Najib, disheartened, replied, "Where can we go? How can we escape? There's no way out of here." The two began to cry again. Just then, Hakim's kafil's car arrived, and Hakim had to leave, but he promised Najib they would meet again the next day. Hakim left a note for Najib buried in the sand, but before Najib could reach it, the wind blew it away. Najib tried desperately to catch the note, but just then, his kafil appeared. So Najib quickly pretended to squat down as if he were using the bathroom. Satisfied that nothing was amiss, the kafil left. Fortunately, the note got caught in a thorny bush, and Najib managed to retrieve it. In the note, Hakim explained that an African man who had been working there for many years knew all the routes and would help them escape. Najib was instructed to be ready for the escape. After reading the note, Najib felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long while, and they began planning their escape. A few days later, they got their chance when their kafils were invited to a feast at the home of a wealthy man. The kafils left the responsibility of the camp to Najib and Hakim and departed. As soon as they left, Najib began preparing for the escape. After many days, he finally took a bath, rummaged through his bag for his clothes, and put them on. Najib, who had once been plump, had lost so much weight that his trousers kept slipping down. He had to tie them around his waist with a rope. He then ate the last piece of pickle from the jar his mother had given him, gathering his strength and determination. Finally, he fed the camels and sheep and bid them farewell, saying, "Stay well, I'm leaving and won't be coming back." Just then, Hakim and the African man Kadiri arrived to take him. Kadiri, who was now their only guide, led them on a long walk until night fell. Thirsty, they spotted a tent belonging to a farmer in the distance. Kadiri offered to fetch water and went to the tent, but the noise woke the farmer, who began firing his gun. The three of them ran for their lives, with Najib even dropping his bag in fear. After reaching a safe spot, they collapsed on the sand and fell asleep. In the morning, they resumed their journey. As they walked, Najib saw something that looked like water in the distance. Overjoyed, he called Hakim to see, and the two of them ran. As Kadiri tries to stop them, they keep running towards the water. After a while, Hakim realizes that there is no water there, just a camel fossil. Upon seeing this, Hakim stops abruptly and embraces Najib. Both are disappointed once again. They continue walking, and after some distance, it is time for prayer, so all three stop to pray. Kadiri then notices that poisonous desert snakes are slowly emerging from the sand. Kadiri moves away with Hakim, but Najib gets stuck in the path of the snakes. Kadiri advises him to stand still, and the snakes pass over Najib without harming him. However, standing barefoot on the scorching sand for so long causes blisters on Najib's soles. He can barely stand, let alone walk, so Kadiri tears his shirt and wraps it around Najib's feet like shoes. They painfully begin to move forward again. As they walk, Najib repeatedly falls, and Hakim, suffering from extreme hunger and thirst, becomes weak. Kadiri struggles to help both of them. At one point, Kadiri carries Hakim on his shoulders, but Najib's condition worsens. Both Najib and Hakim reach the brink of severe dehydration. To protect them from the sun, Kadiri uses his last piece of clothing to create shade, trying to keep them cool. He even tries to moisten their lips with the sweat from his own forehead, showing a level of care rarely seen even among close family. Hakim, unable to bear the thirst any longer, starts running again towards a mirage. Mistaking sand for water, he begins to eat it like a madman and eventually collapses. Najib rushes to him and sees blood coming from Hakim's mouth. As Najib attends to Hakim, Kadiri stands nearby, crying with dry eyes. Shortly after, Hakim succumbs to his suffering and dies. Barely after Hakim's death, Kadiri notices a terrifying sandstorm approaching. He grabs Najib and pulls him away, trying to escape, but the sandstorm quickly envelops them. They manage to survive by holding on to each other tightly. After the storm passes, Qadiri reassures Najib that just a little further, they will find salvation. They start walking again, but Najib soon falls. Qadiri removes the cloth from Najib's feet and sees that his skin is peeling off. Qadiri takes off his own boots and puts them on Najib's feet. Then Qadiri spots a gecko and becomes hopeful, saying that where there is a living creature, there must be a water source nearby. They begin to run with renewed energy and eventually find a small pool of drinking water. Najib lunges at the water, but Qadiri forcibly stops him, explaining that drinking too much water at once after being dehydrated for so long can make the situation worse. He wets a cloth and first moistens Najib's lips to help him acclimate. The touch of water soothes Najib's body. Meanwhile, Qadiri finds an empty Coke bottle and blows into it, creating a whistle sound, because music can calm a person's mind. After some rest, they begin their journey again. After walking a little further, they find a biscuit wrapper and, a bit further, tire tracks. This gives them hope that a settlement might be nearby. But despite continuing on, they find no signs of habitation and once again fall into despair. They spend the night there, and when Najib wakes up in the morning, he finds that Qadiri is gone. However, Qadiri has left behind a bottle of water and a date in a Coke bottle. Najib eats the date and drinks the water, then gathers all his strength and starts running. He runs, rolls, and stumbles, eventually reaching a main road. Vehicles pass by frequently, but no one stops for him. Finally, a sheikh notices him, stops the car, and picks him up. The sheikh gives him water to drink, and Najib, feeling the cool air of the car's air conditioning, falls asleep. Seeing his condition, the sheikh sighs and says, "Poor soul." The sheikh takes Najib to a settlement and drops him off, where a group of Indians finds him and rescues him. They give him a bath, shave his beard and mustache, and provide him with shelter. Within a few days, Najib recovers. One of the Indian community members arranges for him to contact his family by phone. On the other end, Najib hears his wife's crying voice along with his child's. Najib is unable to speak, only listening to his wife's tearful voice. Najib files a missing person report at the police station because he has lost all his identification. At the police station, Najib is surprised to see a photo of Qadiri on the missing persons board. He realizes that Qadiri's employer must have filed a missing report. In any case, Najib is taken to a jail cell where there are many others who, like him, tried to escape their jobs. Najib sees that the police have brought in the employers who are looking for their runaway workers and taking them away with beatings. After a while, Najib sees his employer too, and in fear, he curls up in terror. However, his employer does not take him away, but instead says something in Arabic in a sorrowful voice. Najib doesn't understand, but an Indian man nearby translates, saying that this man was not your actual employer, but had to take you to replace someone else. Hearing this, Najib feels his world turn upside down again, realizing that he had been enslaved in someone else's place. Anyway, without a passport or identification, Najib is sentenced to 3 months in jail. Afterwards, the government arranges for his deportation. As he prepares to return home after all this time, Najib reflects with regret, saying, "My dear child, I came abroad to secure your future, but I am returning with nothing. All I can give you are the remaining days of my life." With this thought, Najib boards the plane, knowing that in just a few hours, he will be reunited with his family. He realizes now that while there may be a lack of money at home, there will never be a lack of happiness. Despite hard work, he will no longer be a captive, and there is nothing more comforting than being in one's own country. Najib has finally come to understand this truth. I hope the remaining days of his life will be filled with happiness. With this, I conclude the story. Viewers, I hope you enjoyed the story. For more stories like this, stay connected with the Elite 10 channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.